Why did the laughter come so easily to them? And why did it stop so suddenly 6 seconds later? She arrived alone, no escort, no announcement, no visible authority to protect her from judgment. Just a government sedan settling into the dust of Ravenfall Valley, its tires crunching against cracked earth baked hard by the Nevada sun. The men of Ghost Tier 9 barely paused their setup when she stepped out. They watched the way people watch something misplaced. A civilian shirt instead of tactical gear. Civilian boots. Hair pulled back with a cheap rubber band. Nothing about her screamed combat. Everything about her screamed mistake. Her hands betrayed her first, trembling, small, rhythmic, impossible to hide. When she signed the range log with her left hand, the pen stuttered mid-letter, leaving a dark blot of ink like a wound on the page. Someone snorted. Someone else laughed. "You sure this isn't a clerical error?" a voice called out. "She's already shaking. Should we call medevac now or later?" Master Sergeant Boone leaned against a supply crate and peeled a crumpled bill from his boot. "$2 grand says she can't even hit dirt, let alone a target," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The laughter swelled, careless and sharp. No one asked her name. A junior tech lit the candle. One flame, placed exactly 2,720 meters beyond the ridge line. The rules were simple and cruel. One shot. The wax had to remain untouched. No splash. No mess. Just the flame gone. Colonel Emry Castle stood at the rear of the observation zone, arms folded, eyes never leaving her. He said nothing. She walked to the furthest bench and set down the long wooden rifle case. The latches popped open one by one. Careful, not elegant. Her hands shook as she unfolded the bipod and settled into position. When the rifle came into view, the laughter shifted into murmurs. It was sleek, black, custom-built, and beneath it, mounted like something alive, was a curved metal device humming softly, glowing nodes, wires tucked tight like surgical veins. "That's not military," someone whispered. "Looks like DARPA lost a bet." She didn't react, didn't look up. She rolled her wrist and watched the wind streamer, 8 miles per hour, southwest drift. Time was short. The desert shimmered, heat distorted distance. She lay prone and exhaled. The world narrowed. No boots, no voices, just the scope, and that flicker of orange at the horizon. The first shot whispered out, barely audible. No recoil, no drama. It missed, not even close. The laughter returned, louder this time. Someone called out about metronomes. Boone lifted his binoculars and shook his head. She didn't move. Her cheek stayed pressed to the stock. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes didn't. She reached forward slowly and began uncoupling the device beneath the rifle. Wire by wire, port by port. The hum faded into silence. Something shifted in the air. Specialist Ava Dorn stepped closer, her gaze fixed not on the rifle but on Rain's forearm. A faint geometric mark peeked from beneath the fabric. Not a tattoo, not a scar, a brand. Colonel Castle glanced at his tablet. A biometric tag blinked green. He looked up. Lieutenant Colonel Marlowe. The name hit the range like a rifle crack. Rain stood, no posture, no explanation, just a nod. Castle stepped closer. The candle still stood, wax untouched, flame gone. "We need to talk," he said. She said nothing, closed the case, walked past them. And for the first time that morning, Ghost Tier 9 stayed silent. But none of them knew the reason her hands shook. Not yet. Why did she never flinch when the shot missed, but everyone else did? 3 years earlier in Carrot, during Operation Dust Veil, Rain Marlowe had sealed a pressure valve with her bare hands. The chemical lab was already compromised. No gloves, no mask, no backup. She did it anyway. 4 hours later, they found her unconscious, lungs scorched, nervous system shredded. She wasn't supposed to survive. And if she did, they told her, she'd never hold a rifle again. "You're lucky you can still write your name." She didn't want luck, she wanted control. So she built it. Neurosync V3 wasn't meant to make her better. It was meant to make her possible. A self-stabilizing system that read tremors and countered them in real time. A digital nervous system for a soldier whose own had failed. She sent the schematics anonymously, 10 applications, 10 rejections. Only Ravenfall let her through, not because they believed in her, because they didn't know who she was. Back on the range, she plugged a short fiber cable into a hidden port. The module chimed, adjusted, learned her tremors didn't stop, they synchronized. The second shot came without warning. Closer. So close it hurt. No one laughed. She corrected midwind, loaded again, waded through a gust that peeled sand from the ridge, didn't blink. The third shot whispered out. Silence followed, heavy, expectant. 6 seconds passed. The flame vanished. Not flickered, not wavered, gone. Wax untouched. Boone's hand opened, the money fell. Ava stared at Rain's sleeve. The insignia was clear now. Spectre Protocol, tier black. Castle stepped forward, your real name. Rain zipped the case shut. Lieutenant Colonel Rain Marlowe, Spectre tier, retired. No cheers followed, no applause. Just recognition. And that was only her opening statement. What happens when the ghost comes back, not to haunt but to lead? 3 days later, Ravenfall went black flag. No press, no reports, just orders. In the briefing room, Rain stood beside Castle as satellite images filled the screen. "This is Dr. Leor Saduk," she said evenly. "He designed the agent that crippled my nervous system. He didn't just change me, he perfected it." The mission was clean on paper. Infiltrate, capture alive, recover everything. It went wrong immediately. The lab was bait. The agent was airborne. "My hand, something's wrong," Ava said. Boone dropped to one knee. Rain watched vitals spike. Tremors appeared. Familiar, intimate. Sedek appeared on the drone feed, calm, unmasked, smiling. "You've been breathing it for 7 minutes." Rain saw Boone's hand shaking exactly like hers had. 3 years ago, she survived. Now they were becoming her. Evac barely made it out. Back at Ravenfall, medics said the same thing they'd told her. No cure, only control. Rain didn't sleep, didn't eat. She rebuilt Nourishing from scratch, faster, deeper, chaotic. "Will it work?" someone asked. "It has to." Boone volunteered first, then Ava, then Castle. One by one, they hit their targets. Not despite the tremors. Because of the control. The Pentagon wanted her to lead adaptive combat integration. She agreed on one condition. They weren't test subjects. They were instructors. Weeks later, observers watched in silence as shots landed true, even when hands shook. That night, Boone showed her a photo. His brother, pulled from service for tremors, gone 11 months later. "Too late for him," he said. "Not for the next one," Rain replied. At the memorial wall, no speeches were made, no excuses offered. Out on the range, someone had placed a candle. 2,720 meters away. Rain looked at it quietly. "We don't need steady hands," she said, "just the will to aim again." Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why didn't she explain herself when the laughter followed her off the range? And why did that silence feel heavier than any insult? Rain Marlowe sat alone in the back seat of the unmarked sedan as it pulled away from Ravenfall. The desert stretched wide and indifferent on either side, heat rippling like a living thing. Her hands were still shaking. They always did after focus broke. Adrenaline left first. Control stayed a moment longer. Then the tremors returned, honest and unforgiving. She folded her fingers together, pressing knuckles until the shaking slowed just enough to be manageable. Outside, the range disappeared behind a low ridge. Inside the car, there was no radio, no conversation, no relief. Just the faint echo of laughter that hadn't fully died when she walked past them. They had laughed because it was easier than asking questions. She had let them, not because she was weak, because explaining required trust, and trust was a currency she no longer spent lightly. Colonel Castle hadn't followed her. That surprised her more than the mockery. He'd watched. He always did. Men like him didn't interrupt moments that revealed character. They archived them. Rain leaned her head back and closed her eyes. The candle was what stayed with her. It was the miss, the first shot. The moment the rifle whispered and the bullet went wide, dragged by heat and wind and her own instability. That moment had almost broken her, not because of the failure, but because of how familiar it felt. Failure used to be loud, explosions, orders screamed over comms, blood on concrete. Now it was quiet, measured in millimeters, in breath counts, in tremors that no one else could feel but her. 3 years ago, she hadn't missed. She hadn't shaken. She had stood on a rooftop in Carrot with lungs burning and a mask fogging, holding overwatch for a unit pinned down in an alley they never should have entered. The gas had been invisible, odorless, designed that way. The first sign was dizziness. The second was fire. She remembered the valve wheel biting into her palms as she forced it shut. Remembered thinking, irrationally, that she couldn't let go because if she did, someone else would have to do it, and they wouldn't survive it. She remembered waking up days later to white ceilings and voices that spoke gently, like she was already gone. "You saved 12 lives," they told her. "You'll never fire a rifle again," they added, almost apologetically. Rain had stared at her hands then, too. They hadn't shaken yet. Not then. That came later. After the nerves died in patterns no one could fully map. After her body stopped listening to the rules it had followed her entire career. They called it damage. She called it exile. The sedan slowed as it approached the secure facility gates. Rain straightened, smoothed the front of her shirt, tucked the memory away where it couldn't interfere. Control was about discipline, about choosing what mattered. Right now, what mattered was whether Ravenfall would call her back. Inside the facility, she moved through corridors that smelled of disinfectant and recycled air. No one stopped her. No one greeted her. Her access still worked. That surprised her, too. It meant Castle hadn't decided yet, or he already had. In the small room they'd given her, temporary, undecorated, Rain set the rifle case on the table and opened it again. Not to check the weapon, to check herself. Her fingers hovered over the components, trembling but precise. She unplugged the core module and rested it on the surface like something fragile. Neurosync V3 wasn't elegant. It wasn't even officially sanctioned. It was layers of compensation built on top of loss. A system that didn't erase her tremors but learned them, anticipated them, redirected them. When it worked, it felt like balance. When it didn't, it felt like fighting your own reflection. The first shot that day hadn't been a failure of the system. It had been a failure of trust. She had hesitated. Rain exhaled slowly and began dismantling the module, checking connections, recalibrating nodes. Each movement steadied her. This was the language she still spoke fluently. Not ranks, not reputations, systems, cause and effect. A knock came at the door. She didn't look up. "It's open." Colonel Castle stepped inside alone. No entourage, no clipboard, just a man carrying weight he didn't announce. "You left before we finished," he said. "You didn't ask me to stay." "That's true." He watched her hands for a moment. She didn't stop working. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was evaluative. "You knew they'd mock you," Castle said finally. "Yes." "You knew Boone would bet against you." "Yes." "You still came." Rain adjusted a sensor and tightened it. "You needed the shot." Castle's mouth twitched slightly. "We needed the truth." She looked up then, just briefly. "The truth scares people." "So does doubt." Rain closed the module casing. Doubt keeps you alive. Castle stepped closer. You could have introduced yourself. And lost the data. He studied her, really studied her now. The civilian clothes, the steady posture that didn't match the shaking hands, the eyes that never searched for approval. You missed the first shot on purpose, he said. Rain didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was even. I missed because I'm human. That wasn't an answer. No, but it was honest. Castle nodded once. Ghost Tier 9 doesn't need perfect shooters. They need adaptive ones. Rain felt something tighten in her chest. Not hope, something more dangerous. You're not cleared for field operations, she said quietly. Neither were you, once. He let that sit between them. Then, we're reviewing an asset Narava-linked, chemical background, slippery, smart. Her fingers stilled. I won't command from a desk, she said. I know. And I won't be a symbol. I wouldn't insult you that way. Castle turned to leave, then paused. They laughed because they saw weakness. They stopped because they saw restraint. That matters. To them, Rain said. It will. When he was gone, Rain sat back and let the tremors take over for a moment. Let them remind her of the cost of every choice she'd made. She wasn't proud of the damage. She was proud of surviving it. That night sleep came in fragments. She dreamed of winds she couldn't read and shots she couldn't correct. Of candles that went out before she fired. She woke before dawn, heart racing, hands shaking, mind already working. By morning the call came. Ravenfall wanted her back. Not as a test. As a variable. On the range, Ghost Tier 9 stood differently when she returned. Not friendlier, just quieter. Boone didn't meet her eyes. Ava did, briefly, curious, calculating. Rain took her position without ceremony. No candle this time. Just steel. She raised the rifle, felt the tremor sink, felt the system adapt. She breathed in, out. And this time, when she fired, she didn't think about proving anything. She thought about belonging. Sometimes, the hardest part of coming back isn't the damage. It's deciding you're allowed to stand there at all. Why did the room feel smaller the moment her voice entered the comms? Like everyone suddenly realized the mission had already begun. Rain Marlowe listened to the briefing from the back of the operations chamber, lights dimmed, screens alive with satellite feeds and probability models. She stood instead of sitting. Always had. Chairs invited stillness. Stillness let the tremors feel louder than they were. Standing gave her a sense of alignment, even when her hands refused to cooperate. Ghost Tier 9 filled the room in loose clusters. No jokes this time. No bets. Just low murmurs and the sound of gear being adjusted. Boone stood near the front, arms crossed, jaw set like he was holding something back. Ava Dorn leaned against a table, eyes flicking between screens, absorbing details faster than most people spoke them. Rain noticed everything. She always did. The way Boone flexed his fingers when he thought no one was watching. The way Ava's posture shifted when chemical markers appeared on the screen. Recognition wasn't always conscious. Sometimes the body knew before the mind allowed it. Colonel Castle cleared his throat. The room settled. This is a live consideration, he said. Not an order, not yet. Rain felt the weight of that phrasing. It meant doubt still existed. It always did when her name entered the equation. The image sharpened. A grainy figure in desert robes flanked by guards. Dr. Lear Sadek, calm, untouched by the chaos he manufactured. Rain didn't look at his face. She looked at the background, the way the light fell, the texture of the walls, improvised lab, mobile, disposable. He's not hiding, she said into the silence. Her voice carried without effort, not loud, just precise. He's inviting us. A few heads turned. Boone glanced back at her, not defiant, just wary. Castle nodded. Your assessment. He wants proximity, Rain replied. He always has. He doesn't sell weapons. He sells exposure. Ava frowned. Exposure to what? Rain met her gaze. Change. The word hung there, heavier than it should have been. Castle advanced the slides. Chemical schematics. Molecular bonds that twisted in unfamiliar ways. Rain felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. This compound, she said slowly, isn't designed to kill fast. It's designed to linger, to rewrite pathways, motor control, balance, fine motor skills. Boone shifted his weight, like nerve agents. Like consequences, Rain corrected. Silence again, different this time, listening silence. Castle looked at Rain. You're certain? I've seen the architecture before, she said. In myself. No one challenged that. The mission parameters came next. Insertion under blackout. Recon first. Capture Sadek alive if possible. Recover everything. No engagement unless necessary. Simple words, dangerous assumptions. Rain listened without interrupting, but her mind was already moving ahead, mapping contingencies. She didn't like clean plans. They broke too easily. When the briefing ended, the room didn't immediately empty. People lingered, hesitated, like there was something unsaid they weren't sure how to ask. Boone approached her last, stopped an arm's length away. I owe you an apology, he said. Rain didn't respond right away. She watched his hands, the faint tremor he tried to suppress by clenching his fists. For the bet, he added, for the mouth. You weren't wrong, Rain said calmly. I did miss. That's not what I meant. I know. That seemed to disarm him more than anger would have. He swallowed. Castle says you're on Overwatch, command bunker. Yes. You don't trust us. Rain met his eyes then. I don't trust variables, I account for them. Are we variables? We all are. Boone nodded slowly. Then account for this, we'll get him. Rain said nothing. Promises like that weren't meant for her. The night of insertion, the desert looked endless from above. Rain sat in the bunker 60 miles out, surrounded by screens and quiet hums of systems that didn't care about nerves or fear. Her hands shook as she adjusted frequencies, but the data flowed clean. Ghost Tier 9 moved like shadows across the feed, efficient, controlled. Ava's voice came through first. Perimeter clear, no movement. Boone followed, proceeding. Rain watched the thermal overlays, too empty, too clean. Slow it down, she said. You're not being watched. A pause, that's good, right? No, Rain replied. That means you're being prepared for. They breached the structure without resistance. Concrete, dust, power still running. A lab that looked abandoned but felt recent. A laptop still warm. A vial suspended in a shock frame. Rain's chest tightened. That's not the lab, she said. It's bait. The warning came a half-second too late. Alarms screamed across the feeds. Red indicators bloomed. Airborne agent detected. Ava coughed. Some things my mouth tastes like metal. Boone's feed shook violently as he dropped to one knee. My hand, damn it. Rain's fingers flew across the console. She triggered emergency protocols, flooding suits with filters, rerouting air. Her hands shook harder now, but the system compensated. Always compensating. But she knew. This wasn't the same compound. This was worse. Another feed activated. A structure off-grid, heat signature blooming where there hadn't been one. The drone zoomed in. Sadek sat calmly at a desk, hands folded, watching the camera like it was expected. You've been breathing it for 7 minutes, he said conversationally. This version doesn't bother with the lungs. Rain felt something crack inside her, not fear, recognition. Get out, she ordered. Evac now. Boone tried to stand. His hands shook violently, mirroring hers from years ago. The symmetry was brutal. Sadek smiled. Absorbs through the skin, straight to the cerebellum. Fascinating, isn't it? Rain broke protocol. He's not there, he's watching you. Castle's feed flickered as he staggered. Can't grip. Evac, Rain barked. Now. Drones screamed overhead. The team moved slower than they should have been. Every second stretched. Rain watched vitals spike, watched control slip, watched history repeat itself in real time. They barely made it out. The bunker fell silent when the feeds cut. Rain sat frozen, hands shaking uncontrollably now that there was nothing left to manage. She stared at the empty screens, seeing ghosts instead of data. She had warned them. And still it happened. Castle entered quietly. They're alive. Rain exhaled shakily. For now. The medics say the compound's unfamiliar. No antidote. Rain nodded once. There won't be. So what now? Rain looked down at her hands, at the tremors she'd learned to live with, learned to master. Now, she said softly, we adapt. Because sometimes survival isn't about stopping the damage. It's about learning how to function after it, and choosing to lead others through the same fire you barely escaped yourself. What do you do when the thing that almost destroyed you becomes the only map you have left? Rain Marlowe didn't leave the command bunker when the feeds went dark. She stayed seated, hands resting on the console, letting the tremors run their course instead of fighting them. Fighting took energy. Energy was for later. Right now, she needed clarity. The room smelled faintly of ozone and recycled air. Screens idled. Systems waited. Outside, somewhere beyond concrete and distance, Ghost Tier 9 was being lifted out of the desert with something inside them that didn't belong. Castle stood a few feet away, silent. He had learned over years of command, when words only diluted reality. They're stable, he said eventually, for now. Rain nodded. Stable was a temporary word, it always had been. Medical feeds began to populate the screens. Heart rates elevated. Motor control erratic. Fine tremors appearing in patterns Rain recognized with a precision that made her stomach tighten. It was like watching her own past played back at double speed. Ava's hands shook first, small, almost polite. Boone were worse, aggressive, uncontained. Castle's appeared later, subtle but unmistakable, a loss of authority in the most intimate place a soldier had his grip. Rain swallowed hard. This wasn't a battlefield failure. This was a design success. Sadik had done exactly what he intended. He didn't just deploy it, Rain said quietly. He refined it. Castle turned to her. You're certain? I've lived it. The med team's voices filtered in through the speakers. No antidote. No precedent. Neural disruption progressing unpredictably. Best estimate, permanent impairment. Rain closed her eyes. You're lucky you can still write your name. The words came back uninvited, echoing from a hospital room she hadn't allowed herself to think about in years. She had hated that doctor, not for his honesty, but for the finality in his tone, as if he were closing a door she still needed. She opened her eyes and stood. I need a workspace, she said. Castle didn't ask what for. They cleared a lab within minutes. Sterile, empty, full of potential. Rain rolled her shoulders, grounding herself, and set the rifle case on the central table. One by one, she removed the components of Neurosync V3, laying them out like pieces of a body she knew better than her own. Her hands shook violently now. Fatigue had stripped away her buffer, but the shaking didn't stop her. It never had. It just forced her to be exact. Technicians hovered at a respectful distance. No one interrupted. Rain pulled up the live biometric feeds of Ghost Tier 9 and overlaid them with her own archived data from 3 years earlier. The similarity was undeniable. Same cascade, same degradation curve, but something else was there now. Variability, instability layered on top of instability. He made it adaptive, Rain murmured. Like my system, only biological. Castle watched from the doorway. Can you counter it? Rain didn't answer immediately. She began typing, fingers trembling but accurate, pulling up old code she hadn't touched since she'd been told to retire quietly and gratefully. "I can't reverse it," she said finally, "but I can teach them to live inside it." The words felt heavy. Responsibility always did. She worked through the night. No breaks, no food, just water and the low hum of machines. She rewrote Neurosync from the ground up, not as a stabilizer for one body, but as a framework that could adapt to multiple nervous systems at once. Faster feedback loops, deeper tolerance for chaos, less correction, more cooperation. At dawn, Ava was wheeled in first. Her eyes were wide, alert, afraid. "Am I done?" she asked, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Rain met her gaze. "No." "Be honest." Rain hesitated, then nodded. "You'll be different." Ava exhaled slowly. "I already am." They fitted the rig carefully, sensors aligned, interfaces synced. Rain watched the data flow like a language she'd invented for moments like this. "Breathe," Rain said. "Don't fight it." Ava closed her eyes. The tremors surged, then shifted, found rhythm, found pattern. "Lift your hand," Rain instructed. Ava did. It shook, but it held. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I can feel it," she whispered. "It's not gone, but it's not winning." Boone came next. He was quieter, angrier. The tremors frustrated him more than the fear ever could. "I don't need this," he said through clenched teeth. "You do," Rain replied evenly. "Or you need to stop pretending you don't." He laughed bitterly. "That's rich." Rain met his glare without flinching. "You bet money on my failure because it scared you. This scares you more." Silence. He sat. The rig took longer with him. His system resisted, fought. Rain adjusted parameters in real time, fingers flying, mind locked in. When he finally raised his weapon and squeezed the trigger, the shot landed clean. Boone stared at the target like it had betrayed him. Castle was last. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "You're already in it," Rain replied. "This just gives you options." His tremor was the worst. Age compounded damage. Pride resisted help. But it worked. One by one, they proved the same truth Rain had learned years ago in a hospital bed she never spoke about. The damage didn't end them. It forced evolution. When the tests were done, Castle handed Rain an envelope, Pentagon seal, heavy with implication. "They want you to lead adaptive combat integration," he said. "Your own command." Rain held it without opening it. Her hands shook around the edges. "I'll do it," she said, "but not alone." Castle nodded. "I thought you'd say that." She watched Ghost Tier 9 through the glass as they recalibrated, adjusted, adapted. Not cured, not fixed, but capable. For the first time in years, Rain felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Not pride. Purpose. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come from undoing the past. It comes from building a future that makes the damage mean something. Why did success feel heavier than failure? And why did Rain Marlowe suspect the cost hadn't finished revealing itself yet? The envelope stayed, unopened on the table for 2 days. Rain watched it the way you watch something volatile, aware that once touched, it would change the shape of everything around it. Adaptive combat integration, her own command, authority she hadn't asked for and had never expected to be offered again. Power wasn't the temptation. Responsibility was. The lab at Ravenfall had changed in subtle ways. Voices were quieter, movements more deliberate. The operators no longer hid their tremors, they accounted for them. There was no shame in adaptation here. That shift mattered more to Rain than any formal approval. Ghost Tier 9 trained differently now. Not harder, smarter. Sessions were shorter but more precise. Every movement was analyzed not for perfection but for repeatability under stress. Rain observed from the edge of the range, tablet in hand, eyes moving constantly. She noticed things others missed. Boone hesitated before every first shot, like he was bracing for betrayal from his own body. Ava compensated instinctively, adjusting grip pressure without conscious thought. Castle overcorrected sometimes, his authority fighting his limitations, until Rain intervened with a quiet recalibration. None of them complained. That worried her. Pain acknowledged is manageable. Pain swallowed becomes doctrine. One afternoon, after a clean run that would have impressed any observer, Rain called a halt. "That was too good," she said. Boone frowned. "We hit every mark." "You followed the system," Rain replied, "not yourselves." Ava tilted her head. "Isn't that the point?" "The system supports," Rain said. "It doesn't replace judgment. If you stop listening to your own limits, you won't recognize when they change." Silence followed, thoughtful this time. Rain knew the risk she was taking by pushing back against institutional hunger. The Pentagon didn't want nuance. It wanted results, proof that damage could be weaponized without consequence. She wouldn't allow that. That night, she finally opened the envelope. The offer was comprehensive: command authority, funding, resources, visibility, a future that would put her name back into circulation, stripped of the footnotes that had buried it. She read it once, then again. Then she folded it carefully and set it aside. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it brought Carrot back with it. The lab, the valve. The moment her hands slipped and she thought briefly, irrationally, that maybe this was where she stopped. She woke with her heart racing, hands shaking violently, breath shallow. She sat on the edge of the bed until dawn. In the morning, Boone found her on the range, already setting up. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Rain didn't look up. "I did." "Doesn't sound like it." She paused, then straightened. "Your brother," she said quietly, "force recon." Boone stiffened. "What about him?" "He wasn't weak," Rain said. "He was unsupported." Boone's jaw tightened. "They pulled him because he shook. They pulled him because they didn't know how to adapt." Boone exhaled slowly, anger leaking out with the breath. "You can't fix that, not everywhere." "I know," Rain replied, "but we can start here." That was when the second message came. Not from the Pentagon. From Sadek. It arrived encrypted, routed through channels that shouldn't have existed anymore. A short video, grainy, intentional. Sadek sat in the same chair, same calm posture. No guards, no hurry. "You're doing impressive work," he said, as if commenting on a paper she'd published. "Turning weakness into infrastructure. I always wondered if someone would." Rain watched without expression. "You and I," Sadek continued, "are proof that exposure is evolution. The others are just catching up." The video ended. Castle watched it beside her. "He wants attention." "He wants escalation," Rain corrected. "And you?" Rain's hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "I want him contained." "That won't be clean." "It never is." Within hours, Ravenfall shifted posture. Black flag again. No observers this time, just intent. The intel was thin, but enough to suggest Sadek was moving, relocating assets, testing variations. "He's iterating," Ava said, "like he's racing something." Rain nodded. "He is." "Who?" Boone asked. Rain didn't answer immediately. She thought of the envelope, of the program, of the moment when control becomes momentum. "Us," she said finally. The plan was risky. Limited insertion, no prolonged exposure, remote oversight with rapid extraction. Rain would remain off-site. Castle watched her closely when she said it. "You don't trust yourself in the field," he said. "I trust myself," Rain replied. "I don't trust what he's designed." They moved before dawn. Rain monitored from the bunker, heart steady, hands shaking, mind sharp. The feeds showed Ghost Tier 9 moving with a confidence that wasn't bravado. They knew their limits now. That knowledge made them dangerous in a way training never could. They found Sadic's lab hidden beneath a decommissioned pumping station. Smaller, cleaner, more controlled. "This is a test site," Rain said. "He's not here." Ava froze, then why? The alarms triggered instantly. Rain's breath caught. "No," she whispered. "He changed the delivery vector." The compound wasn't airborne this time. It was contact-based. "Seal suits," Rain ordered. "No skin exposure." Too late. Boone hissed as his glove tore on rusted metal. Ava cursed as her sleeve brushed a surface she shouldn't have touched. Rain watched the data spike and felt something inside her go cold. Sadic's voice cut through the comms. "Live now." "You see," he said almost kindly. "No two nervous systems respond the same. Control is an illusion. Adaptation is truth." Rain leaned closer to the console. "You're wrong." "Oh." "Adaptation requires consent." Silence, then laughter. The team extracted under fire, not bullets but time. The compound worked faster this time. Harder. The tremors intensified, chaotic, threatening to overwhelm the system. Rain made a decision she'd hoped never to make. She patched her own neural sync directly into the team feed. "Follow me," she said calmly. "Match my rhythm." The system strained. Data surged. Pain flared through her arms like electricity. Her tremors spiked violently, but the feedback loop stabilized across the network. One by one, the others synced. They made it out. When the feeds cut, Rain collapsed against the console, breath ragged, hands shaking uncontrollably. Castle caught her before she hit the floor. Medics rushed in. As they worked, Rain stared at the ceiling, vision blurring, body screaming at her for the risk she'd taken. She didn't regret it. Because sometimes leadership isn't about standing in front. It's about letting others lean on the damage you already know how to carry. Why did the silence afterward feel louder than any alarm? And why did Rain Marlowe know this was the moment everything would finally ask its price? Rain woke to stillness. Not the peaceful kind, the artificial kind. The kind that hummed softly and smelled like antiseptic and clean sheets and controlled breathing. Her eyes opened slowly, pupils adjusting to dim light, and the first thing she noticed, before the pain, before the confusion, was that her hands weren't shaking. That terrified her. She lifted them into view, studying them like foreign objects, still, too still. For a heartbeat, panic flared in her chest. Then the tremor returned, faint at first, then honest. Relief followed close behind, sharp enough to sting her eyes. She was still herself. The room came into focus. Medical bay, Ravenfall, monitors blinking patiently, indifferent to the weight of what had happened. Someone had draped a blanket over her shoulders. She didn't remember lying down. Castle sat in a chair near the wall, asleep, his posture awkward, authority finally set aside. Ava stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded tight, eyes red but steady. Boone leaned against the doorway, hands shaking openly now, not bothering to hide it. "You scared the hell out of us," Ava said quietly. Rain swallowed, her throat felt raw. "Did it work?" Boone let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "We're standing, that's something." Rain nodded once, standing mattered. Castle stirred and looked up, relief crossing his face before command returned. "You went too far." "Yes," Rain said hoarsely, "I know. You could have fried your own system." "I almost did." Silence followed, heavy, honest. Ava stepped closer. "Why?" she asked, not accusatory, curious, hurt. "Why risk yourself like that?" Rain looked at her hands again. The tremor was stronger now. Pain radiated up her arms, a deep ache that reminded her of Carrot, of valves and fire and choices that couldn't be undone. "Because I recognized the moment," Rain said softly. The one where someone has to decide if this ends here or keeps taking pieces of us. Boone rubbed his face. Sadic's gone. Rain's eyes snapped up. Gone. Pulled his feeds, Castle said. Wiped the site. He wanted to prove a point, not win a firefight. Rain closed her eyes. She hadn't expected closure. People like Sadic didn't believe in it. He'll keep iterating, Ava said, on others. Yes, Rain agreed, but not in the dark anymore. The Pentagon arrived 2 days later. They always did, once survival became data. Rain stood in the observation chamber, leaning lightly against the table to ground herself. Her hands shook openly. She didn't hide them. She didn't apologize for them. Screens displayed performance metrics, recovery curves, adaptation rates, proof of concept, proof of success, proof that damage could be systematized. The officials spoke in careful language: opportunity, scale, deployment, efficiency. Rain listened until they finished. Then she spoke. You want to build a program, she said evenly. I want to build a safeguard. A pause, a subtle shift. You turned impairment into operational advantage, one of them said. That's unprecedented. No, Rain replied. I turned survival into permission. They didn't understand that, not fully, but Castle did, Ava did, Boone did. Rain slid the envelope back across the table, unopened. I'll lead, she said, but this isn't a pipeline, it's a refuge. Silence stretched, measured, negotiated. Finally a nod, terms. Rain didn't hesitate. Consent, transparency, no forced integration, no silent removals, no erasing people when their bodies change. Another pause. This limits scalability. It preserves humanity. The words landed harder than she expected. They accepted. Not because they were convinced. Because the data demanded it. Weeks passed. Adaptive combat integration became real, not as a division but as a doctrine. Soldiers rotated through Ravenfall not to be fixed but to be understood. Tremors were measured, not mocked. Limitations were mapped, not punished. Rain watched it all from the range, often alone. She still fired when she needed to remember the feel of it. She still missed sometimes. She didn't pretend otherwise. One evening, as the sun sank low and the desert cooled, Boone approached her carrying something small. I found this, he said. A candle unlit. Rain took it carefully. Her fingers trembled around the wax. I used to think shaking meant you were done, Boone said. My brother thought that too. Rain looked out across the valley. The ridge line was still there, distance unchanged. We taught people to fear change, she said, then punished them for surviving it. Boone nodded, not anymore. They placed the candle on a stand. No ceremony, no challenge, just a marker. Rain didn't shoulder the rifle. She didn't need to. The flame caught gently in the evening air, steady for now, fragile by design. Ava joined them, then Castle. Others followed at a distance, not intruding, just witnessing. Rain watched the flame dance and thought of everything that had brought her here. Carrot, the hospital, the laughter, the miss, the second chance she'd built with shaking hands and stubborn resolve. She spoke quietly, not to command, not to teach, but to name a truth. We don't need steady hands, she said. We need honest ones. The wind shifted, the flame flickered but held. Rain smiled faintly. Because dignity had never been about perfection. It was about refusing to disappear when the world decided you should. Sometimes strength doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it shakes. And sometimes, despite everything, it still chooses to aim.